Greetings, people of the musical gender. I'd like to say a few more things about my chord symbol, my new chord symbol, or things that I might have failed to mention yesterday. I showed you the type indicators, and I forgot to point out that the symbol for the dominant type chord with my bass chords, the dominant type bass chord is a lowercase d, because we use uppercase letters for note or tone names. You'll always see a tone name as an uppercase letter, whether it be A, B, C, D, E, F, or G. So to symbolize the dominant bass chord type, we use a lowercase d. That way you don't get confused. All right? Then on the size indicators, I mentioned that in my system there are only 4 size indicators, which is true, but there are 5 sizes. There's your 5th chord, 7th, 9th, 11th, 13th, but there are only 4 size indicators because for the 5th chord, you don't really need a size indicator. You see this space is blank, whereas over here you have the 7, and the 9, and the 11, and the 13 on those symbols, but you don't need that number 5 to represent the 5th chord, to denote the 5th chord, because it's not needed. It's given. It's assumed. So there are, and with my bass chords, there's 5 sizes, but we need only 4 size indicators. Want to try to make that clear? And then when we build chords, let's say we're not really analyzing, we're just making a chord. We take notes on our staff paper and we put the chord together. Now, to teach new students, with my system, to teach new students or little children precision, I make sure I use the correct terms. See, back in the day, people would say, okay, we build chords in thirds, and thirds that are superimposed. But that's not true. When you superimpose, what you're doing is you're actually placing thirds on top of each other. See, superimposition means placing on top of. So actually what you'd have is duplicates of the, let's say, E here. You'd have duplicate G's in this situation. But in my system, I teach that we superpose. We place above. We place a note above the root. It's the 3rd. We place a 5th above the 3rd. We place a 7th above the 5th, and so forth. So we superpose. We place above. We don't place on top of. We don't just pile them on and even mentally get duplicates in the mind. Now down here, let's say we have a C major bass chord, and if we want to stick in that 2nd, that's a D there, for sweetness, we would interpose. We would interpose the D note, that means place between. Let's say we had over here, we had another chord, all right, we had this chord, and we wanted to stick in this 4th, this perfect 4th for sweetness in this chord. And so that means we would interpose. Okay? We place a note between. All right, it's hard for me to see this on this tiny phone. So in my system, we superpose notes, and sometimes if we want to, we interpose. All right? And we don't say stacked, because piano tuners use that term, stacked. And it suggests a sense of randomness in the choice or placement of tones. So I don't say stacked. I don't do that. Now on these 2 chords, while we're at it, let's take a look at those, because those are pretty neat. The first one in my system would be called a C major bass chord. Right, it's a C major bass chord, and we added a major 2nd. So our modifier right there shows that it's an added major 2nd. C major bass chord with an added major second, and you don't need to put the 5 down there because by default you know it's a 5th chord. You know that, right? So the size indicator here is not needed. Now on the other chord, this is a very nice chord actually. Sounds really nice. We have a C minor 7 bass chord with an added perfect fourth. And we don't need to put the P on there, P4, to indicate 4 because it's given. If you see the 4 stands alone, that means it's in its natural condition, its natural state. So you have here, so you have the C minor 7 bass chord, then you interpose the F, the fourth, and there you have a beautiful sounding chord. I love that chord actually. So those are two that we just looked at. We get to take a little deeper look. Now, instead of just building from scratch, let's say you have a piece of music and you're listening to this music and you're wondering what the chords are. Well, you could take almost any piece of music, like orchestral music. Here's a piece of, just a sample piece of music from my orchestration book by Alfred Blatter. I'll just show you this one sample. He has just a little sample piece here. It's too hard to see, but I'll hold it up anyway. Right? And in that sample, you would say, oh, I would like to know what is that chord in measure 1, beat 1. All right? If you take a straight line and measure 1, beat number 1, you go down like this, and you list the notes that are written, you would get this. Okay, for measure 1, beat 1, you'd see the violins are playing a G5 and a G4. That's the violin 1 section. The violin 2 section is playing a D5 and a B4 and so forth. All right? And when you superpose these notes on your staff paper, you want to put them in thirds. You want to superpose them in thirds. And if you do that, you'll find out that this is nothing more than a G major bass chord. You have all these notes. You have all these notes being played here on measure 1, beat 1, and all it really is, and you discover this, all it really is a G major bass chord. Now you see down here it says the note that the bass player plays is a G3, but actually for the bass instrument that tone will sound an octave lower. So you see a G3, but it's actually a G2. The point is you end up with a very simple chord, a G major bass chord. Now you say, well, I want to know what they're playing. Measure 2, beat 2. All right? So we discover that the first violin section's playing an F sharp 5 and an F sharp 4. In other words, this first violin section is divided into two groups. All right, so they can play two different notes. And the second violin section and the violas can play two different notes because they're divided. Now you see the bass group here is playing one line, one note, so they're not divided. But the point is, you put this on staff paper, you arrange them in thirds, you figure out how they can be superposed in thirds, and you find out that you have a D major bass chord. It's very simple, common D major bass chord. But you notice here, down on the lower registers with your cello, all right, and your bass, they're playing an F sharp note, whether it be a 3 or a 4 or a 2. And so you indicate that when you write your symbol, you put that forward slash, and you make sure you put in the F sharp to denote that the bass note is not the root note. It's not the same as the root. They've chosen to use the F sharp as the bass. And that's it. That's just an example to show you how you don't need to build a chord from scratch. You can take pre-existing music, and there's thousands and thousands of pieces of music out there, especially from Dover, the Dover Publishing Company. and you can take and analyze almost any vertical line of notes. You just figure out what notes are playing, all right? You superpose them in thirds, you figure it out, and that way you can, if you wanted to reduce, let's say, any piece of music, instead of having a whole string choir play something, and you say, well, I just have a guitar, an accordion, and maybe a clarinet player, and I want to reduce this, so I want to know what chords they're playing, so I can say to the guitar player, say, hey, here, just play a D major or a G minor 7. That's how you do it. You look at your music, you work it out, and then you can impart that information to your fellow musicians. And that's it for now. So thank you for being patient, and I hope to see you soon.